good morning, fellow humanists. My name is Todd Kimball, and it's an honor to be your MC this morning. Humanism is a rational philosophy informed by science, inspired by art, and motivated by compassion. It advocates for the extension of participatory democracy and the expansion of an open society standing for human rights and social justice. And back with an enthusiastic encore, we have Pete and Paul Barquette.
Even when they get hurt, I'm thankful for my dreaming, even when I know it won't work. I'm thankful for my memories, even when I remember pain, 'cause there's so many things that I have done that I'll never do again. Now the lady came to see me, my old feelings were still there. She said that she had found someone for whom she really cared. I tried to hide my suffering as I wished her peace and joy, but now all hope is gone. Nobody's ever gonna stay with this old boy. But I'm thankful for my feelings, even when they get hurt. I'm thankful for my dreaming, even when I know it won't work. I'm thankful for my memories, even when I remember pain, 'cause there's so many things that I have done that I'll never do again. You can't stop the world from turning, and it won't always turn your way. So you got to build a philosophy to get you through the longer days. You can't make somebody love you or promise to be there. So learn to love without demands, and you live without a care. And you'll be thankful for your feelings, even when they get hurt. You'll be thankful for your dreaming, even when you know it won't work. Just like I'm thankful for my memories, even when I remember pain, 'cause there's so many things that I have done that I'll never do again. So many roads that I have run that I'll never run again. Say there's so many times that I have cried, I don't ever want to cry again. That's why I'm thankful for my feelings, even when they get hurt. I'm thankful for my dreaming, even when I know it won't work. I'm thankful for my memories, even when I remember pain, 'cause there's so many things that I have done that I'll never do again.
One of the things I love about the humanists is their desire for a safer, better, more inclusive world, which features more happiness and social justice. We have so many issues to tackle on a global basis, and we could use some help with an approach to help change the world for the better. Greg Coleridge has been providing the roadmap and getting others to follow along for over 3 decades. He is the co-director of Move to Amend and has worked for more than 30 years with American Friends Service Committee in Ohio, where he dealt with a range of justice, environmental, and democracy issues. He is the author of several works on social change. Backed by popular demand, let's have a warm welcome, both online and at the Friendly House, for Greg Coleridge.
Well, greetings, everyone. Thank you so much for the very kind and warm introduction, Todd. Thanks to everyone for the invitation, Helen Christian, Joyce Lackey, and thanks so much to David for helping along with Todd here earlier this morning in making sure that this Luddite was able to work the computer. So I am sharing my screen. I do have a few slides to share with you. Creating a democracy movement. I appreciate very much in the introduction hearing, as I am aware of, the positive, constructive, and persistent and insistent role of humanists in being involved in the promotion of justice and peace and nonviolence in all of their forms. I worked for many years for a Quaker-related organization, as mentioned, the American Friends Service Committee, but worked with people of all religions and ethical persuasions in working for justice, peace, and nonviolence. And humanists and those of ethical persuasions were very involved in many endeavors that AFSC was involved in Northeast Ohio and across the state. So the topic this morning that I have chosen to address that I think is relevant these days is creating a democracy movement. And the description that I sent ahead of time that maybe some of you had an opportunity to read is basically this: that social change that has expanded the rights of people, strived for peace, and called for protecting the planet has always been the result of ethical and committed individuals who have organized powerful, nonviolent people's movements. Social change has never just sort of automatically, magically appeared, come down on high, or just because of hoping or praying or wishing, but has only occurred because of people who have been dedicated, committed, who have invested time, energy, and resources to make it happen, sometimes against tremendous odds. The magnitude of the current crises is multiple, as listed there: political, constitutional, ecological, economic, and social, that we are facing demand an authentically diverse, democratic, and independent democracy movement with the power to implement fundamental solutions that are proportionate in scale to our current challenges. So I'm going to break down some of these concepts and terms going forward. The multiple crises we face that I've mentioned, and we could spend the whole time dealing with this, but I don't want to get involved in sort of an exercise in simply talking about ain't it awful, because it is awful. Dealing with many of the fundamental crises we face, be it political, with the will of people not being reflected in public policies of our public officials, constitutional, the breakdown of checks and balances, the various amendments to the Constitution being hijacked by corporate entities and well-to-do individuals. There's a wider assault on the rights that have been granted. We're seeing that with potentially Roe v. Wade being reversed. And there's just a reduction in legitimacy of the Supreme Court, which in of itself sort of lends a certain constitutional crisis to the fore. An ecological crisis that goes well beyond simply climate change to deal with everything from soil depletion to species extinction to water pollution, dead seas, and so many other concerns. Economically, we're facing debt, inequality, poverty, inability to meet basic needs, and a social crisis, multiple, of increasingly people sort of seeing one another as the other. Polarization, hate, fear, all of this adds to it. And certainly the isolation, depression, and sense of hopelessness or powerlessness is a piece of the social crisis that has been certainly added on and magnified by the now 2-year and counting pandemic. So we're dealing with the number of problems and issues. The distinction between those two, and there is a distinction, is whether it's these issues of healthcare, education, guns, and all the rest there, or in the second category of more sort of structural, whether it's the structure of public officials or political parties or regulatory agencies, the courts, corporate entities, the military, police, intellectual, I should say intelligence, quote unquote, agencies, which oftentimes aren't so much involved in gathering information as they are trying to overturn or pervert democratically elected nation states across the world, or infiltrate and break up social movements in this country. All of these, some of them are problems, others are issues. The distinction is that when enough people recognize a problem, then it no longer is a problem, but therefore it becomes an issue that people feel like they need to try to do something about. Unfortunately, many problems have not yet sort of been understood widely and deeply enough to be transformative into issues that we'll sort of get into. So I would assert, despite what I've just listed, that the fundamental problem that we're facing or issue that we're facing isn't any of what I just listed here, or to be even more specific, the fundamental problem or issue that we're facing isn't Joe or Donald. It's neither political party, nor is it any particular regulatory agency that we may feel has been captured or just not doing their job. EPA, FCC, FDA, any of the others. It's not any of the billionaires out there, or even potentially coming up to being a trillionaire, be it Musk, Bezos, or Koch. It's not any individual or even collection of corporate entities out there that are certainly doing their darnest to cause immense harm to people, communities, and the planet. Nor is it any entity out there, FBI, CIA, NSA, Homeland Security, that is either snooping on us or, again, doing mischief abroad and trying to undermine sovereignty, democracy, or a right to decide, self-governance. It isn't any of that. The fundamental problem or issue I would assert we're facing is democracy, or in particular, a lack of it. We have what Jane Ann Morris, who has developed her own website, she being a corporate anthropologist who I worked with for many years with an organization called the Program on Corporation Law and Democracy. She says our democracy is little more than a theme park. And I invite you to visit her website, Democracy Theme Park. Unfortunately, she passed a number of years ago, but her books, articles, and the like remain, and they are very insightful in asserting that which we think of as democracy is sort of akin to walking down sort of the main street of your favorite theme park that you may frequent frequently or infrequently, where you know how it is. You walk down the main sort of boulevard and it all looks like it's real, it's legitimate, it's a storefront, it's a building, but then when you kind of look around the back, it's being held up by 2x4s. And that's sort of what she believes, and many of us believe, is kind of sadly what democracy has become. The problems or issues that democracy is that we're facing right now, and some of these are more problems, again, meaning they haven't yet reached the point of widespread understanding and problematic concern, and thus has not yet become a quote unquote issue, are numerous. And I'm sure this listing does not capture the full totality of it. From an undemocratic constitution in which we, the people, from day one has never, ever been all the people, a dominant narrative in which too many people, and this is an example, I believe, of a problem and not yet an issue, too many people still believe that democracy begins and ends with voting. That's where it starts, that's where it ends, period. Next topic. Statutes, many laws, many statutes are simply undemocratic. Representatives, those we elect, there's such an incredible, is there not, disconnect between what people want and the kinds of policies we have or don't have from voters. The president having too much power through executive decisions, regulatory agencies, again, many of those having been, in fact, almost all of them have been to some extent, if not to a great extent, captured by those entities that they are to regulate, the proverbial fox being in the henhouse. Media, in particular corporate media, that tells us what they think we ought to know, which oftentimes are happy faces or just soupy and syrupy quote unquote news that's little more than infotainment and is blathering along on horse races and that which is not fundamentally transformative and important, affecting our lives. A Supreme Court that is increasingly unaccountable, biased, and is part of the reason why we're having an increasing crisis of the court, with a sense of illegitimacy in it being a sort of a neutral party. Fewer and fewer people believe that. The sense of public institutions, public entities being increasingly privatized or corporatized, and there's a whole litany of those. The culture, whatever degree of democratic culture we have ever had, waning, with now sort of an increasing belief, if not support, for top-down leaders who are strong men abroad or who came before us, maybe never elected to president, but still who are strong and maybe even defied the rule of law, if not the Constitution itself. A decline in civics education that is rampant, a belief that democracy is immobile instead of it being fluid and transformative, that we can do something to it, that it's not a noun, but rather a verb, that we can be active and make better what exists now. The sense that the basic truths out there are being questioned, and there really is not any basic truth. The truth isn't sort of absolute, but is relative based on what a person may simply believe. Secrecy, lack of transparency, fear being used to conceal and control. So, again, whether it's national security state or any other institution out there that uses fear, and certainly social media falls into that camp. Various isms, racism, homophobia, sexism, ableism, and the ageism, all that being used to divide. And we know from time immemorial to the present, divide and conquer has been one of, as well as co-optation, maybe the two favorite mechanisms of the very few to maintain dominance and control over the very many. Economic stress being used to keep people occupied and immobile, away from being involved in democracy, again, to doing it, not just sort of looking at it. Gerrymandering, voter suppression, corporate rule, especially by banking corporations that are dominating not just sort of economic decision-making, but governing. Economic inequality, where massive inequality economically gets transferred and transported into political inequality. They go hand in hand. And the corrupting influence sort of connected to economic inequality of elections. So all of these are either problems or issues, depending on the degree, the understanding, the breadth and depth of awareness and understanding of these problems by many people. When there are many people who kind of see the aha, that this is a problem, therefore it is transferred to an issue. So we got a problem. Democracy is, under crisis, no question. It is I would assert, fundamental crisis that we're facing. And so the magnitude of the current crises, again, that we're facing, demand and authentically, and these words are highlighted because I want to address them individually. It requires and demands diversity, democracy, independence, power, and that power being proportionate in scale and in magnitude to the current challenges that we're facing. Meaning that many of the issues that we talk about, and that many of them that you are involved in or that I'm involved in, sort of going back here to sort of this arena here. I'm sure many of you, as I am, are involved in any one or ones of these, particularly the top one of being concerned about healthcare, lack of education, or gun control, or economic injustice in many forms, housing, poverty, whatever the case may be, that those concerns, those issues, to the extent they're understood, are, if you will, vertical. I call them vertical. Whereas the change that we need needs to be horizontal, meaning democracy, I would assert, or social movements are ways that connect those individual vertical issues, that it's too easy to become pigeonholed or too easy to be siloized in working and believing that our individual single issue is, quote unquote, the most important, or the singular one that is sort of a trigger to so many others. And to a certain extent, you're absolutely right. And I'm absolutely right, because those individual issues, healthcare, gun control, or the like, are sort of representative of fundamental concerns, of fundamental reasons why we can't go from home base to first base, or making it all the way around the bases, using a baseball metaphor. Hey, it is the season. But the truth of the matter is, just as much as it is true, it is also untrue, because to focus singularly on those single issues means that we are, in a sense, siloizing or pigeonholing ourselves in not seeing the interconnections and not putting in context the systemic issues, the systemic problems, the systemic barriers to making it around the bases, to having achieved real significant healthcare change or significant gun control or education for all or jobs for all or any of the other single issue. And so therefore the challenge, I think, is to understand that we need to focus when we're thinking about system change more on a horizontal basis, on changing, in essence, the rules of the game, that by not changing them, those rules of the game are fundamentally stacked against us, people at the ground level. And no matter how hard we try, we can't get out of that box, that limited box that we are in that is becoming ever smaller in every direction. That box being, if you will, democracy, the ability to govern, self-rule, self to decide, right to decide, democracy, sovereignty, whatever you want to call it. That ability to basically be involved in, seated at the table when fundamental decisions are being made that affect our lives, our families, our communities, our state, our nation, the natural world. So how do we create a democracy movement if we believe, as I'm asserting, that the real essence is this sort of horizontal focus? What needs to be done to do that? Well, I would assert there's 4 elements to creating an authentic democracy movement. The first is a commitment to an authentic commitment to diversity. And by diversity, that the construction, the composition of that movement made up of people is made up of people that reflect society at large in every way, socially, economically, racially, gender-wise, sexual orientation, and all the rest. But in particular, what's important in terms of diversity is that in disproportionately, if you will, those individuals who have been disproportionately negatively impacted, meaning people who are on the front lines historically, who have been oppressed, who have been punched in the gut or kicked in the mouth, need to be disproportionately in leadership. They have disproportionately been hurt and impacted. Therefore, those individuals representing those communities need to be disproportionately in positions of leadership. Secondly, a movement that's authentically democratic a democracy movement needs to be democratic, meaning direct democracy as much as can be possible, where every single person has an opportunity to have an equal voice in the actual direct decisions being made, where and when that's possible. Sometimes, of course, that isn't possible. And sometimes, of course, maybe that may not be preferable. There is a time, certainly in larger government, not just in movements, where representative democracy, I would assert, is better. I mean, I don't necessarily want to be asked, let's say in my community, to have a vote on where every single stop sign is going to go on every corner, or other issues that I just simply don't know enough of because I just haven't spent, the sufficient amount of time to study before making that decision. So in some instances, it makes sense to have a representative democracy where we elect people to represent us. But we can have a whole heck of a lot more direct democracy at every level of government, and especially in movements that are made up of people that exist even in now. Many movements that are out there working for change among people who are the good government types are incredibly top down, in which decisions are not being made by members, by supporters, by people who are being directly impacted. And so that needs to change. Democratic, authentically movement to be democratic needs to be inclusive and collective. It needs to be transparent as much as possible. And it needs to be cooperative and horizontal, where the leaderships that may be, again, either voted on or somehow chosen are operating on sort of a horizontal level as much as possible, sort of cooperative, and as less as possible, if at all, in any kind of hierarchical method or magnitude. Third, such a democracy movement to be authentic needs to be independent. And by independent, we mean politically and economically. By politically, not sorry, you can't be a front group for a political party, for a billionaire, for a corporate entity, for a major foundation or group of foundations. That just ain't going to cut it, because as this image shows, it's way too easy to have those strings attached, to have those movements become co-opted, silenced, self-censored by the leaders, if not by the members, knowing that whoever it is that is pulling the strings, if they don't feel that what we're doing sort of has stayed within the proper, appropriate, understood boundaries, then that support is going to be cut off. And that's connected to the economic independence. It's very important not to be supported by a very few number of, again, whether it's individuals or entities, whether those entities, again, institutionally, are corporate entities, foundations, even government, and the like. Far better to have many people giving a little bit of money than a few people giving a lot of money. And fourthly, an authentic democracy movement must be powerful and proportionate. Let's face it, if we're going to bring change, those who are trying to oftentimes force change on, they're not always going to see the light. Sometimes they will. And sometimes our efforts in simply trying to bring information, show them what needs to be done, they will, so to speak, see the light. But if they don't see the light, then it's up to us to make sure they metaphorically feel the heat. And to feel the heat means one has to amass power. And power historically in our societies come, generally speaking, either from organized money or organized people. And if you don't have the one, you sure as heck better have the other. And so the ability to amass people in an organization or in a movement is incredibly important, in that movement must be in scale, in proportion to the magnitude of what it is we are trying to address. If you have a small problem, small scale works in terms of power. Medium problem, medium scale in terms of institutional movement, power and force and capacity to act. But neither of those apply, my friends, I believe, to the situation or multiple situations, that being crises, that we're currently facing. And thus, I believe we need a massive, fundamental movement, the likes of which we have never seen before in this country. The largest movement up to this point that has occurred over the history of this country over a period of time maybe has been the populists of the 1870s through 1890s. More recently, over a short period of time, the Black Lives Matters movement over the last couple of years has been just incredible in terms of the breadth and depth of mobilization of people and information out there. But both of those, even if you put them together, are not what is required to address the fundamental threats and harms to society and to the planet that a lack of democracy has occurred. So in that case, the size, the magnitude of the movement that we have to create must be in scale and in proportion to the crises that we're facing. Okay, so as opposed to elements of an authentic democracy movement, the strategies, I would assert, of an authentic democracy movement are also fourfold. I promise I'm sort of near the end here. The first is what I would call being to focus on the self. Now you may think, well, what does this have to do? We're talking about a movement. What does that have to do with the individual? What does that have to do with me or you? A number of years ago, I visited India and studied the Gandhian movements for social change around the country for 7 weeks, traveling alone. And one of the places I visited was this institute called Institute for Total Revolution, north of Bombay, now Mumbai, run by this man named Narayan Desai, the son of who was the secretary of Mahatma Gandhi and his major biographer. And Narayan Desai developed this organization, Institute for Total Revolution, and by total revolution, he didn't mean as we may think in the West today of, well, total means what? Local and national. That's total, right? If you bring about change, it's got to be at the macro level and the micro level, or it's got to be economic revolution as well as political revolution, right? Those are sort of total as we sort of imagine and think about. That's not how he and his disciples and those who were involved in the Gandhian movement for social change thought about total revolution. By total, they meant inward and outward. The total revolution was this change, a radical transformation, not merely of the material conditions, but also of a person's character. They went hand in hand. The reason for that is no matter what we may do in terms of a revolution, no matter best case that we might create, let's just say immediately in 24 hours, whatever we could imagine, the very best scenario we could create institutionally, there will always be threats to that. There will always be ways of trying to find loopholes. There will always be efforts at trying to subvert those institutions. So no institution, no structure, no organization, no constitution, no matter what it says, all by itself is enough. You have to have a strong and moral sense of a population of a sufficient number and sufficient commitment who are there to protect, to strengthen, to constantly evolve, because no institution, nothing should ever be stagnant. It's always under change because external conditions change, life changes. And so those structures have to change. And to have them change for the better, it can only be done by people of a strong moral character, committed, again, to being more moral, compassionate, just, peaceful. And by compassionate and just, we mean not just economically, but also just politically, i.e. democratically. So the first strategy of an authentic democracy movement has to be a commitment to helping individuals become more moral, compassionate, just, and peaceful. And social movements in the past have done this. There have always been, has there not, change in this country and abroad. There's always been people of faith, people of ethical persuasions that have been at the forefront, as well as oftentimes labor, people, working people, people on the ground, working for better conditions, as well as students who oftentimes have a moral sense of the future, of which in certain degrees and magnitudes and position in life that we don't have, who are older and who are not of that age or opportunity. So anyway, the first strategy is this of self-improvement. The second has to be to respond, to react to those crises out there that are occurring, the threats right now that we are seeing, whether it's to healthcare, to education. Again, we could spend the whole afternoon talking about all those threats, all of those things that require a response, a reaction, things that we need to oppose to. We need, again, metaphorically, not to stop to putting out fires or not to stop trying to hold up buildings that are ready to collapse, but to understand that if this is all we do, that it's never ending. There are always fires to be put out. There's always threats. There's always oppression. There's always injustices, individual. There's always, metaphorically, buildings that are ready to collapse. We need to do these, but we need to understand that just to do these requires, again, no pun intended, but we will burn out and movements will burn out if that's all that they do. So thirdly, we have to be about, if it's an authentic democracy movement, to be about the business of creating alternatives, whether those alternatives are structural, trying to change the culture. And historically, social change, if you think about it and understand and look at the history of social movements and social change in this country, it has always involved changing institutions, changing structures, and changing the culture. In fact, the culture has to precede the institutional. In essence, what the culture is changing, in essence, the mindset of what is going on today regarding whatever it is, whatever oppression, whatever harm is not inevitable, is not inevitable, is not how it was meant to be. It's not, quote unquote, God's will. It's not something that we can simply change if we think about it hard enough or wish for it. No, we can change it. It needs to be changed. We have the capacity to change. We have the power to change if we can come together. So all of that revolves around changing the culture. And so creating alternatives, some of those need to be cultural institutions. And historically, that's involved a whole wide assortment of institutions. And, we heard at the beginning of this program, your program today, music and the arts have been an incredibly important vehicle for changing the culture, for helping people think differently, to have visions, to have a sense of what we can have. And there's the vision out there. Now, what do we need to do from where we are today to that vision to get there? What are the steps involved? And what do we need to do to educate, advocate, and organize? And then the institutions. What are the institutions that need to happen? And there's a boatload of those now, ever since the pandemic, particularly at a local level that maybe some of you are involved in. Alternative self-help organizations, mutual aid, people thinking about safety differently, people sort of involving in cooperative sharing of resources, or buying clubs, or buy nothing groups, co-housing organizations, local currency programs, just a variety of alternative structures, alternative institutions that exist at a local community level, if not elsewhere. And then lastly is structural change, actually gumming up the system. If we feel that the system and structures are unjust, are undemocratic, are harming people, communities, and the planet, then we need to resist. And it's not enough to just simply being, again, some of that resistance to oppression and to injustice and to violence, into undemocratic institution involves, and this listing here of these three categories of nonviolent protests and persuasion is category 1, non-cooperation being social, economic, and political being 2, and oftentimes that takes the case of boycotts, and intervention being a 3rd. A social movement historian by the name of Gene Sharp has spent his whole life, he passed away a number of years ago, sort of came up with, I think it was like 198 instances of nonviolent action that people historically, from the Romans and the Greeks up to the present time, and the present time didn't even include pretty much the age of the internet. So now there's a whole, gamut of ways to oppose and resist and sort of gum up the system, including hacking of websites that Gene Sharp did not conceive of when he wrote his works. So it would be well over 200 instances now, but these are the categories of a whole wide, and I can, post the listing of where you can find his example, or you just may want to Google Gene Sharp 198 methods of nonviolent change. So there's protest and persuasion, there's non-cooperation, of all assortment of boycotts, but this last category is maybe the most significant and the most relevant when it comes to structural change, intervention. Meaning at some point, when the system has stopped authentically being responsive to the will of the vast majority of people, and I would argue we are well on our way to that, if not having crossed the Rubicon. We are maybe not yet in terms of a tipping point of people ready to en masse be involved in resistance. But by resistance, we're talking about, again, what people in this country from the day of the revolution in this country to women's rights, to the end of slavery, to the end of the passage of the 17th Amendment that had direct election of senators, to Vietnam War and ecological movement. People have literally put their bodies on the line and committed mass forms of civil disobedience. And it could be that we are on the cusp of that. So maybe that's something people would be interested in talking about. So people's movement, it's happening now, it has happened, but there is sort of an increasing energy, both in breadth and in depth in that. I'll just end by saying Move to Amend, which is what I'm involved with, is trying to do its part in sort of building in helping build a authentic democracy movement. Our goals are to pass what we call our We the People Amendment that I know some of you because some of you are already a part of Move to Amend. Thank you so much for your support and interest in many years. It's to make clear that artificial entities, such as business corporations, do not have constitutional rights, and that money is not a form of free speech. If money's speech, those who have the most money have the most speech, not a real good definition of authentic democracy. And in terms of corporations having constitutional rights, that is equally a bizarre constitutional doctrine. Only people are people. And artificial entities are artificial entities. They are creations of the state and should be subordinate, as they were intended to be, to we the people. Our strategy is much sort of as reflected in what I've previously asserted in terms of what it takes to build a democracy movement. We're trying to work with others to build a coalition, reaching out to other organizations working on issues that intersect with corporate power or money in elections. We're trying to build a broad and diverse, multiracial and intergenerational movement, again, trying to reach out to individuals who in communities that are most directly affected by corporate rule. We try to focus on not just being involved in activism, but organizing at a community level, in building leadership, in building capacity, in building skills to be leaders in movements. And we focus on grassroots organizing. There's a place, certainly, for working at a national level, but any successful movement historically has to have a national presence, but that national presence ultimately is only going to be as strong as the presence and not just the numbers, but again, the skill, the ability, the capacity to act, which again is another word for power at a grassroots level. The only current effort we believe Move to Amend is that's focused on transformative and fundamental structural change that has all of these together, not just any one or two, but all of them. We have an actual bill in Congress called the We the People Amendment. It's called HJR, the number is HJR 48, with substantial support of House members, 92 co-sponsors. There's a lot of efforts out there to call for, this and that, fundamental, get rid of the Electoral College, a number of things that don't have, it may have been introduced, and there is a bill that's been introduced in Congress to get rid of the Electoral College that has like 2 co-sponsors. And there's other things that are sort of fundamental and calling for that has been introduced, but doesn't have, up to this point, much support in Congress. But we're not only that, but we have substantial organizational support, over 600 organizations, religious and ethical organizations, governmental at sort of a local level, good government organizations, labor unions, women's groups, variety of law firms who understand. A lot of law firms that represent clients are going in court against corporate entities. And they get killed most of the time because the laws and rules are set up to favor corporate entities. So we have more than 600 organizations. We have significant grassroots support. Nearly 500,000 individuals support our cause. And over 700 communities have passed either municipal resolutions at the city council, county commission, village level, community level, or ballot initiatives, where people have gone around and gotten signatures to get a measure on the ballot saying, we the people of Portland, Oregon, or Sacramento, or Denver support this measure. We're calling on you, Congress, to pass this constitutional amendment. And over 700, one or the other, has been created. And we have a viable, independent national organization, Move to Amend. So there's no other effort out there like that that has not just one or two, but all of these together. So it is a rare situation, and it is one that's opportunistic, that we think we're in a good position to at least be a part, in a significant part. We're not the movement in no way, shape, or form. We're not claiming to be. We can't be, but we can be a part of, and we can help try to create, but we need help, including help from every single one of you. And so I'll just simply end by sharing some of the activities currently that we're involved in. We right now are organizing what we call movement education and empowerment talks that are virtual education and action programs, where we try to, we have 50 local groups, organizations right now, Move to Amend groups, some more active than others. The one in Portland isn't very active right now, but we're interested in sort of in areas where we have no presence, in areas that we may have a presence, but sort of needs to be jump started. We want to organize one of these. And so we'd love to find out if people on this call would be willing to be part of one of these virtual programs where we, have a person from National Move to Amend talk about what's going on, but have people representing local efforts in your community, whatever community that is, talk about some of those efforts that in some way, shape, or form, again, intersect with corporate power and money in politics. That, again, going back to the metaphor I mentioned, that of baseball, is having a hard time getting past first base, whether it's healthcare, education, whatever the issue may be, because of the fundamental undemocratic ground rules. That money being defined as free speech, corporations defined as people, they're holding all the cards, they've got all the power, and they're making it impossible for us to really get as far as we'd like to go. Move to Amend 117th campaign, we have a goal of reaching 125 co-sponsors. I don't know if your congressional co-sponsor or if your congressperson is a co-sponsor of the We the People amendment or not. Pledge to Amend. This is an effort of trying to get your state representatives, whether it's a state senator, a state representative, people running for state positions, governor, attorney general, a treasurer. If treasurer, secretary of state, sometimes some states it's appointed by the governor, sometimes those are directly elected. It's trying to get those individuals to take our pledge, because the truth of the matter is people who are the Congress people and senators today at the federal level were yesterday your state governors, state senators, state representatives, and the day before that, actually, they were your mayors, your city council people. This year, I don't believe is a real big one, 2022 for mayors and council people, but it is a big one for state level. So this would be an opportunity if people are interested to approach, and there's a link, and I will put in the chat all of these links for people if you're interested in reaching out to your state senators, your state reps, your statewide office holders. Pledge, so that's a pledge to amend. Okay, and down there is if you have not yet signed our motion to amend, please do so. I'll just simply end. Right now, nothing is very sure. There is a lot, is there not, up in the air. There is a tremendous amount of uncertainty. That's the bad side. The positive side of that is when nothing anymore is certain, when we are sort of not anymore sort of in a route or in a what is it called when you are sort of in a rut. When you are no longer in a rut, there is an opportunity for some incredible change of direction, some pivoting. And that, it can go many ways, but it's up to us to make it go in the right way. Everything is truly possible. The only thing holding us back is us not getting together. And I'll just say a little shameless self-promotion for anyone interested. I've just written a book called The Depth of Change. I'll put in the link. It's a whole 3 decades or more of writings related to what I've worked on. And then lastly, you can reach me if you want to reach out to cuss and discuss anything beyond today. Feel free to do that. Thank you so much. Sorry to take so much time.
Greg, thank you so much for a thorough presentation today, for leaving us with many resources and some hope. But I know we're going to have many questions. I'll start with the first one. That's okay. This is an audience that I think there would be 100% agreement with the kinds of things that you talked about today. And I'm wondering, how often is this presentation given to audiences that may be a little more hostile toward participatory democracy or less aware of the threats to democracy?
Well, it really all depends what group it is. I have spoken in the past to military related groups, to groups that are more focused on, I guess you could say, that politically would be quote unquote libertarian, let's say, with organizations that are sort of across the board. Our amendment, for example, We the People amendment, wherever it's gotten on the ballot, it has always passed because people, I think, understand that, whatever the whatever political party, that there is this disconnect between the kinds of issues that people feel are important and the kind of representation that they are receiving, and that money is polluting the political system and corporate entities have too much power. And it's funny now, you're finding, I don't know if funny is quite the word, but maybe ironic is more, where you're finding people now on the other side, what I would call the other side, even though we feel that our amendment is transpartisan, but people who now are saying, who are more quote unquote politically conservative, saying, who believe that the media corporations have way too much political power in sort of Twitter taking unilateral decisions on who should have the right to have an account or not, or Disney Corporation, right, weighing in on political issues, or other corporations in Georgia and other places weighing in on voting rights and the like. So all of a sudden you're having people who have taken boatloads of money in the past from corporate entities, now all of a sudden flipping and saying, oh, corporations have got too much power and the like. So there's some cognitive dissonance going on there, is there not? And so there's an opportunity for us to try to take advantage of that sort of nothing is certain, that uncertainty right now, that last slide, to try to get people now to sort of rethink, and maybe rethinking in terms of rethinking the relationship between people and corporations is one that people will become much more receptive to, and I think are across the political spectrum.
I think there's something to be said for a movement gaining strength when you have both sides coming together in different ways with different ideologies. Shows that the movement is getting stronger. And our first question from the chat comes from the humanist with the ironic name, Mr. Al Christians.
Yes, when you started out, it sounded like you were trying to organize the movement to change everything, but then you said, well, you're not the movement, and you went to this, there have to be lots of little movements kind of thing, and organic change. That's wonderful, but it kind of takes me back to the time when I was born about 70 years ago, and there were already about 100 organizations in the United States that had 1 million members that were all trying to do good. Everything from the American Legion to the Elks to the Royal Arcanum to everybody. We had we had over 100 organizations with 1 million members. That's a country with only about half as many people as we have now, and those 100 organizations all had twice as many members as you did. This was what Galbraith called a system of countervailing power. Lots of institutions, lots of whom would be compromised, but just having lots of different institutions that were relatively strong is what kept democracy working fairly for all the different interests. It wasn't that any of them was particularly good. It was that they were in balance, and it was an equilibrium system. Is that pretty much what we're going for here?
It's a good question, and I think it's an open question. It's hard to know how the exact configuration may be. Some individuals believe that we'll probably win nothing until we win everything, because everything, so many people are so focused on and still remain focused on kind of their individual issue area. And there will be at some point some recognition that, my gosh, we've tried everything and nothing sort of seems to work. And so we're going to have to kind of figure out how we come together around something that is more horizontal, whether that is a single, a very single organization, or whether it's multiple that is saying the same message, sort of a movement of movements, each in their own way with their own sort of reflection of how they focus on, we need a democracy movement, one that's more with a flavor, if you will, of healthcare, another with environment, another with, gun issues, social issues, whatever the case may be. Who knows how that may work, how that may look. But I do believe that at some point it is inevitable. It either is inevitable or we get fascism. Well, I mean, one or the other. And I hate to be so crass, but I think, what choice do we have? Trying to go through sort of the legitimate systems that have been established, quote unquote, democratic systems, is yielding less and less. There is an economic term called a law of diminishing returns, right? Where the more and more effort you put into something, the less you get back. And we're dealing with that right now democratically. We're putting more and more effort and there's less return on that investment of democratic input. We're getting less return on that investment, and people are sort of, I think, kind of figuring out of, my God, the whole thing is fixed. It's not that the system is broken, but rather it is fixed, as in rigged, to benefit a very small number of people, as well as a very small number of entities. So not quite sure if that totally answers your question, but if not, feel free to follow up. And I did put in, I'm sorry, I put in twice, the first couple of links of things, move to amend, that people may be interested in.
P. Leslie Haggard has been writing in the chat and has made some excellent comments. Latest comment: most action won't work until we significantly change the system. And as an example, Senate representation. Let's go to the friendly house for a live question from our studio audience and Dave DiNucci.
I mean, you've said how much we have to do. I mean, and it's a big, it sounds like quite a movement that we'd have to put underway, but it sounds like there'd also be a huge resistance. I mean, there's all kinds of resources against all that kind of democracy happening, because all the people who currently have all of this power through corporations, through whatever, through the current statement that money is speech and all that kind of stuff. I mean, that sounds like a huge resistance. Is this a potential for violence and stuff to come up and actually have kind of a war between these two power centers, the people and the people who don't want the people to have all this say? Yeah.
Well, there's no question. There's incredible resistance now, is there not? Incredible resistance to all of the reform movements, as opposed to the transform. And that's what we're talking about, sort of the distinction between reform versus transformative. Incredible resistance now. The resistance to what we're talking about would, in some cases, take different forms. And some of that, would involve as sort of the powers to be of previous times and previous governments in previous historical periods have included sometimes the arms of the state or the arms of the entities, armies, navies, the like, and the companies involved having their own police force, if you will. Media, corporate media is already resisting in a variety of ways, including disinformation and including trying to put to sleep people by, gorging us over entertainment and mistruths. But what it would also do, it would also show, it would also limit, if not extinguish, the veneer that many people believe is slowly being peeled away, if not almost all the way, that we are living, if we ever had, to begin with, a real legitimate democracy. Just as the most effective use of a gun, if you think about it, is when a person has it and never has to use it. When you have to use it, now all of a sudden, it's pretty clear that that person is violent and not really with us. And so by the state having to show, again, if you look at, Gene Sharp, historian, in his work, shows very effectively how when the state actually begins to use violence, that is the beginning of the end of most states. If the response is nonviolent in proportion. Governments then lose the credibility and authenticity it had. It is no longer representing the public. So is there a chance that there will be violence? Absolutely. Is there a chance that people will be harmed? Absolutely. Is there a chance that people will be killed from this? Absolutely. Are people being harmed? Are people being hurt? Are people being killed today as a result of the policies that aren't just, aren't democratic, aren't trying to create a livable world, are destructive of our ecosystem? Absolutely.
I'll ask a specific follow-up question to Dave's question. For those that have been following the January 6th committee hearings, I think it's become increasingly clear that we were very, very close to having the election overturned had it not been for a handful of people doing the right thing, people who normally did not speak out too much for democracy. So my question is, if the election had been overturned, what action had moved to amend and others planned? What do you think would have happened if the election had been overturned?
Well, it is hard to say. I was quite disappointed actually in the year 2000 when I felt that election was stolen by the Supreme Court over Bush v. Gore. The side that turned out, people were not on our side. We're not for making sure all the votes were counted. Very disappointing, very disheartening. And some of that, of course, was a result of the leadership of people having the, their suggestion of don't turn out, don't show up, don't take to the streets, don't risk a constitutional crisis. So some of what would have happened would have been, I think, a response to how many people would have, what the position of, say, the Democratic Party would have been. I don't know what position they would have taken. Would they have demanded people go to the streets? I think so many people would have responded to that, more so than what Move to Amend would have done. I think, Move to Amend and so many other democratic, quote unquote, democratic organizations would have called for mass demonstrations, not just sort of show up on Saturday in DC or in the State House when nobody is there, but call for, we're going to occupy, similar to what's happened, in Eastern Europe during some of the colored revolutions of 10, 15 years ago. There was some discussion about that in sort of inklings that we're going to go to DC and we're going to stay there until something happens. This was before January 6th, of course, when there was talk about that that the Electoral College was not going to meet in the various states. So there was some discussion among movement groups about what they would do. And so that was some of the early discussion. Whether that would have actually transpired, I don't know, but that was some of the discussion.
I'll read a comment from Sheila in the chat. I just read a summary of the new book about Jack Welch and how he changed corporate culture and began to destroy the middle class in America. That right now we have a system where one person can make change easier than pledges of thousands.
That's true. And is that not a concern? The challenge, I guess, on our part is to make that an issue. And to the extent we can make that an issue is to the extent that we can get people, hopefully, to come together at least a little bit in of what time they do have. We're not saying that if you're involved in some reform group to stop doing that. That needs to be, if the house is burning, you got to try to put out the fire. But what also has to happen, we believe, is there has to be some effort made to be committed to the horizontal. And I put in the chat a number of resources, one of which is we're doing this, what's called Radical Gathering, Cultivating the World We Deserve, a national event coming up. And this is sort of a gathering together of organizations who are going to be talking about, what are the impediments to real democracy? What can we start talking about collectively? because we have to continue to build out both in terms of numbers, but in terms of depth of understanding. And it's not easy to do when, I posted before that whole list of challenges to democracy, one of which is we are so damn busy. And the system has sort of made it to where a lot of people just can't survive unless they do two jobs, or, unless they're just spending a whole heck of a lot of time just surviving. So they don't have in a sense, the privilege. And without that, it's awfully tough. But I should say, and this is important, there's a historian, a nonviolent historian, sort of a modern day, Gene Sharp, her name is Erica Chenoweth, who has written quite a bit and talks about social change and has studied sort of social movements, nonviolent social movements around the world, and has found two takeaways. The one is that when violent actions are taken by the state, when it's responded nonviolently, it's 50% more successful than when it's violent. And second, you're a lot more successful when you can get, we tend to think, oh my God, you have to organize 50% plus one. You don't. All you need is 3.5%. 3.5% of people who are really committed to making change is what sort of the magic tipping point, it seems. Look her up. Erica, I'll put her name in the chat. She was, if anybody ever listens to Hidden Brain, gave an excellent program maybe a year ago in which she talks about this. It's well worth the listen.
Suzanne has her hand up in our Zoom audience.
Thank you, Greg, for your presentation about democracy and bringing it back in. There's so many groups around the country that are doing their things, the things that relate to them. In the Northwest, we have a pretty strong environmental movement, and we have to keep the oil and gas industries off of our rivers for transport across the seas. We have to watch our timber industry. We have to see who's on their boards. We're trying to clean this up and dig deep into, the power that they've been able to gain. So, that's one thing, and it requires so much work. And then that's just us. And that's just one little piece of us. And so all these groups, how will this all come together? I know that's what you've been talking about, but it's like, it's amazing because it's going to require more work. Or is that the way I should look at it? Give me another way to see it.
Well, yes and no. I mean, part of the work that needs, I guess what I'm saying is that, the resistance and the reaction to all those things you're talking about needs to continue. But if that's all one does, it's never ending. And some of those things, at a point, there is a tipping point in which there is fundamental destruction of, there's only so many forests that will be saved to a certain extent before the whole system collapses. And so you have a sort of a collapse, whether it's an economic, an ecological, a political, and the like. So what I'm asserting is if people just spend 10%, repositioned themselves to say 10% of what you're focusing on now, to put it more toward fundamental change, system change, to put what you're doing now in context that, we can try to deal with the frackers out there. And try to stop one well site at a time. Okay, let's try to stop one well site at a time. There's a whole hell of a lot of well sites that are out there that are being fracked, and you'll just run around like your chicken with your head cut off if that's all you do. You're not getting at it. So the point is, you can still focus on maybe one instead of focusing on 10. Maybe still focus on one or two, but say that even though I'm trying to stop these two, we're not going to get anywhere, my friends, unless we deal with some of the fundamental issues. Who has passed the laws that allow fracking to be a state issue and not a local issue, as it originally was in Ohio, until the corporate entities, the oil and gas industry, came in and preempted that, or dare I say, trumped that. and moved it to a state level. So when you moved it to a state level, no longer is it a local democracy issue. So to point that out while you're focusing and while you're trying to stop doing that helps educate people who are in that fight, who are laser focused on that fight, to say, you know, we'll forever be doing this. And some will never get it. Some will just continue because that's where they're at. That's how they're wired. That's okay. But hopefully some will get it. Some will understand that I'm just tired of doing this. I'm tired of always just opposing. I want to propose. I want to go on the offensive. I don't want to forever and ever and ever and ever be on the defensive. And that's right now what a lot of activists are doing. We're constantly on the defense. And when you're on the defense, you're operating under somebody else's agenda. I don't know about you, but I'm tired of operating on somebody else's agenda. Jane Ann Morris, if you go to democracythemepark.org, she has a wonderful article about help, I've been colonized and I can't get up. It's all about being on the defensive, we activists showing up to regulatory hearings and always, just not getting anywhere because it's set up to not get anywhere. And so part of what we do, and I'm looking at the chat, is part of what we do is try to expose. The regulatory agencies are tremendous in general at regulating activism, at regulating us. They don't oftentimes get at what is fundamentally the problem because they're not set up that way. So we try to say, the fundamental of democracy is sort of in part the we the people amendment. We can't deal with all those things of the, we don't focus on gerrymandering. We don't focus on some of those other things, but we do focus on how the system is rigged in terms of money and politics, in terms of corporate constitutional rights, in terms of the courts being captured and being incredibly biased, as well as, the three branches of government have been sort of, I think, captured as well. We can't do everything, but one of the projects that we've created is toward a people's constitution. It's linked in one of the things I put in there. It is an effort, if you go to that website, it's sort of an arena where we hope to gather together everybody who is focusing on constitutional reform, whether it's the women's rights movement, right? The ERA still has not been ratified. So we want to get the ERA people together, people who are focusing on ending the Electoral College, we don't have a right to vote. There is no right to vote in the federal constitution, by the way. So, there's all of that. There's some people want to end the Senate as a branch of government. The state of Nebraska has a unicameral system of government. Is it any worse? They don't have a Senate version. They just have a House of Representatives. So, I don't know about that. Some good things about it, some not so good things. The Senate ain't all that Democratic these days. So that's an arena where we can't do everything, but if we can create and help create the forum where people who are working on these other things can come together and say, all right, what are the similarities? Are there any similarities that are preventing all of us from getting where we want to be? So that's what we hope to do through this radical gathering. And that's what we hope to do through this toward a people's constitution.